number-chained beneath an alien lake. The dragon sobbed, until a human diver pulled her out. The water was red, not the red of blood, but the deep crimson of minerals that had settled in this lake for millions of years. Dae-ho checked his diving suit's displays one more time before he dropped deeper into the darkness. The pressure readings climbed higher. With each meter he descended. Above him, somewhere on the surface of this strange moon called Thesara 4, his team waited in the small research station. They were watching his vital signs, tracking his position, ready to pull him back if anything went wrong. Dae-ho had done hundreds of dives in his 5 years with the Terran Exploration Corps, but this one felt different. The water here was too quiet, too still. His helmet lights cut through the red water, creating twin beams that disappeared into nothing. Thesara 4 was supposed to be a simple survey mission. The moon had valuable minerals in its lakes and oceans. Human companies wanted to know if mining here would be profitable. Dae-ho's job was to map the lake floor, take samples, and report back. Easy work. Boring work. Then his scanner had picked up something strange. The signal was deep, far deeper than any natural formation should be. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. When Dae-ho reported it to his team leader, Lieutenant Hae-jin had frowned at her screens. She ran the data through every database they had. Nothing matched. She told him to check it out, but be careful. Dae-ho was always careful. That's why he was still alive. The darkness grew thicker as he descended past 300 meters. His suit handled the pressure easily, but the isolation was getting to him. Down here, he was alone in a way that few people ever experienced. The silence pressed against his ears despite the soft hum of his breathing system. 400 meters. 500 meters. The signal was getting stronger. Then he saw the bottom. The lake floor spread out beneath him like a vast plain of dark sediment. Strange rock formations jutted up here and there, carved by ancient currents into bizarre shapes. Dae-ho slowed his descent and activated his forward thrusters, gliding just above the bottom. The signal was coming from ahead, somewhere in a trench that cut across the lake floor like a wound. Dae-ho approached it carefully, his lights probing the darkness. The trench was deep, maybe another 100 meters down. He adjusted his trajectory and descended into it. That's when he saw the chains. They were massive, each link as thick as his entire body. The metal was dark and covered in growth, but Dae-ho could see strange markings carved into the surface. The chains stretched across the trench floor, disappearing into the darkness on both sides, and they were connected to something in the center. Dae-ho's heart began to beat faster. He moved closer, his lights sweeping across the scene. The chains converged on a massive shape that lay motionless on the trench floor. At first, he thought it was a rock formation. Then, he saw it move. Just a slight movement, barely noticeable. But it was there. Dae-ho's hand went to his emergency beacon, ready to call for help. But he didn't press it. Instead, he moved closer, his curiosity overcoming his caution. The shape was huge, easily 100 meters long. As his lights played across it, he began to make out details. Scales. Massive scales that overlapped like armor plates. A long tail that stretched away into the darkness. Wings, folded against a powerful body. And a head. A massive head with a snout full of teeth and eyes that were closed. "Control, this is Dae-ho," he said into his radio. "You're not going to believe what I'm seeing down here." Hae-jin's voice crackled back. "What is it?" "I think it's alive. And I think it's been chained down here for a very long time." There was a pause. "Say again?" "There's a creature down here. Something like a dragon from old Earth stories. It's chained to the lake floor." Another pause, longer this time. "Can you get video?" Dae-ho activated his suit cameras and slowly circled the creature. It didn't move, except for that slight rise and fall that might have been breathing. The chains weren't just holding it down, they seemed to be connected directly to its body, piercing through the scales in several places. Where the chains entered the flesh, Dae-ho could see a faint glow, like electricity running through the links. Video received, Heejin said. Her voice sounded shaken. Dae-ho, those chains are technological. They're not natural. Someone put that thing there. Dae-ho knew she was right. The chains were too regular, too precise, and those markings on the metal looked like writing in a language he didn't recognize. He moved closer to the creature's head. Up close, he could see that its scales were dull and scarred. This thing had been here for a long time. Suffering in the dark. Dae-ho felt something twist in his chest. He had always hated seeing animals in pain, even alien ones. Then the eye opened. Dae-ho froze. The eye was huge, easily bigger than his entire helmet. It was golden, with a vertical pupil like a cat's, and it was looking right at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Dae-ho's hand was still on his emergency beacon, but he didn't press it. The eye wasn't angry or threatening. It was sad, so incredibly sad that Dae-ho felt his throat tighten. Then he heard it. A sound that came through the water and through his suit and straight into his bones. It was a cry, a sob, a sound of pure grief and loneliness that seemed to contain centuries of pain. The creature was crying. Without thinking, Dae-ho reached out his gloved hand and placed it on the creature's massive snout. The scales were cold under his palm. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe to comfort. Maybe to connect. Maybe just to let this thing know it wasn't alone anymore. The moment his hand touched the creature, something happened. A jolt, like electricity but not painful, ran through him. And suddenly, he wasn't alone in his head anymore. Images flooded his mind. Not words, but feelings and visions. He saw stars and planets he didn't recognize. He saw creatures like this one flying through space itself, beautiful and powerful. He saw other beings, smaller ones, looking up at the dragons with worship and fear. He felt love and duty and pride. Then he felt betrayal, capture, chains, darkness, pain that went on and on and on, for so long that time lost all meaning, loneliness that crushed the soul, the slow fading of hope, the acceptance of death, and a name, not in words, but in feeling, Henri. Dae-ho gasped and pulled his hand back. The connection broke, but the echo of those feelings remained in his mind. He looked into that golden eye and saw intelligence there. This wasn't just an animal. This was a person, trapped and tortured for longer than he could imagine. Dae-ho, what's your status? Heejin's voice sounded worried. Your vitals just spiked. I'm okay, he said, though his voice shook. Her name is Henri. Dae-ho didn't know how he knew that, but he was certain. And we need to help her. Dae-ho, we can't just, we have to. He interrupted. You didn't feel what I felt. We can't just leave her here. There was a long silence. Then Heejin said, There's something else. We're picking up a ship entering orbit. It's not human. Dae-ho looked at Henri. The eye was still watching him. And now there was something else in it. Hope. Fragile and small. But there. I'm not leaving her. Dae-ho said. Number. Chained beneath an alien lake. The dragon sobbed, until a human diver pulled her out. Dae-ho stayed with Henri while his team worked frantically above. He kept his hand on her scales, and through that touch, her memories flowed into his mind, like a stream of ancient dreams. They came in fragments, broken pieces of a story that spanned millions of years. He saw her world as it had been. A planet of crystal mountains and silver skies, where beings like Henri soared through clouds that sparkled with light. They were called the Ryuvari, and they were beautiful. Each one was unique in color and form, but all shared the same grace and power. They didn't just fly through air, they could travel through space itself, their bodies somehow able to survive the void between stars. The Ryuvari had been explorers and peacekeepers. When they found younger species struggling to survive, they helped. They shared knowledge, but never forced their ways on others. They believed every species had the right to choose its own path. Henri had been a guardian, one of those who traveled far from home to watch over the younger races. She showed him memories of worlds she had protected, species that had been at war learning to live in peace, civilizations saved from disasters, children of 100 different species looking up at her with wonder and trust. The Ryuvari had been honored across the galaxy, called the Sky Shepherds by some, the Star Dragons by others. Then came the species that would become the Velthics. Dai-Ho saw them as they had been then, primitive and struggling on a harsh world. They were dying from a plague that their medicine couldn't cure. Henri and 3 others of her kind had come to help. They brought medicine and knowledge, staying for generations to ensure the Velthics would survive. The Velthics had been grateful at first. They built statues of the Ryuvari. They sang songs about them. But as the years passed and the Velthics grew more advanced, something changed. They began to study the Ryuvari in secret, trying to understand the source of their power. They wanted it for themselves. Dai-Ho felt Henri's confusion when the first betrayal happened. One of her companion, Ryuvari, a younger male named Kethva, simply disappeared. They searched for him everywhere, but found nothing. By the time Henri understood what was happening, it was too late. The Velthics had developed weapons specifically designed to hurt the Ryuvari. They used energy fields that could disrupt the biological processes that let the dragons survive in space. They created chains that could drain the Ryuvari's life force and use it to power their own technology. Henri showed him the day they came for her. She had been protecting a colony of refugees, people from dozens of species who had fled their own worlds due to disasters or wars. Among them were humans, though they looked slightly different from the humans Dai-Ho knew. These were from an ancient diaspora, humans who had left Earth so long ago that the memory of their home world had become mythology. The Velthic fleet had surrounded the colony and demanded Henri's surrender. If she didn't, they would destroy everyone. Henri had fought. She destroyed 3 of their ships before their weapons overwhelmed her. The energy fields burned through her body like fire. She fell from the sky, unable to fly, unable to fight back. They chained her while she was still conscious. She felt every link lock into place, felt the chains burrow into her flesh and begin to drain her life away. The pain was terrible, but worse was watching them take the refugees. The humans and all the others were loaded onto ships and taken away. Henri never knew what happened to them. The Velthics brought her here, to this moon that was far from any civilized system. They placed her in the deepest, darkest place they could find. The chains were connected to generators on the surface, using her stolen life force to power Velthic installations. She would die slowly, over thousands of years, every moment of her existence feeding the empire that had betrayed her. At first, Henri had fought against the chains. She had raged and struggled, trying to break free. But the chains only drained her faster when she struggled. So she learned to be still. She learned to make her breathing slow and her heartbeat quiet. She existed in a state between life and death, her mind drifting through memories to escape the endless present. She had been alone in the darkness for so long that she had forgotten how to count the years. Centuries passed like days, millennia like years. She felt other Ryuvari dying across the galaxy, their life forces winking out like candles in the dark. The psychic bond that connected all her kind grew weaker and weaker as their numbers dwindled. Eventually, Henri stopped hoping for rescue. She accepted that she would die here, alone and forgotten. She had made peace with it. All she wanted was for someone, anyone, to know what had happened. To know that the Ryuvari had existed and had tried to do good in the galaxy. She didn't want her people to be completely forgotten. Then, after eternities of darkness, a light had appeared. A small light, far above. And it came down into the depths where no one had come before. When Henri saw the strange creature in the diving suit, she had been confused. Was this another Velthic, come to check on their prisoner? But when Daeho touched her, she knew immediately that he wasn't Velthic. The psychic connection formed instantly, and she felt his emotions. Curiosity, compassion, a deep sadness at seeing her suffering, and determination. Henri had cried then, not from pain but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen after so long. Someone knew she existed. Someone cared. Through the connection, she tried to tell Daeho that saving her was impossible. The chains couldn't be broken without killing her. But she showed him something else. On the first chain link, the one closest to her heart, was a small crystal. It was a memory keeper. A Ryuvari technology that could store information the way computers stored data. Before her capture, Henri had recorded everything she knew. The locations of other imprisoned Ryuvari, the truth about the Velthic Empire, evidence of their crimes. If Daeho could take that crystal, at least the truth would survive. Other species would know what the Velthics had done. Maybe, someday, someone would free the other Ryuvari, or at least give them proper burials when they finally died. But Daeho's response surprised her. Through their connection, his determination burned like a star. He wasn't going to just take the crystal and leave. He was going to save her. Somehow, even if it seemed impossible. Henri wanted to tell him not to try. Wanted to tell him that she was ready to die, that she had accepted it. But the hope in his heart rekindled something in her own. A tiny spark of the fire she thought had gone out forever. Back in the present, Daeho's radio crackled. It was He-Jin again. That ship has identified itself as Velthic. They're demanding we cease all operations and prepare to be boarded. Daeho looked into Henri's golden eye. Tell them we're just doing a survey. We haven't done anything wrong. They specifically mentioned the creature. Daeho, they know about it. They've probably known about it all along. Of course they had. They were the ones who put her here. Daeho felt anger rising in his chest. How long until they reach the surface? About 2 hours. Then we have 2 hours to figure this out. Daeho turned to look at the chains. He-Jin, you're the best engineer I know. Can you analyze these chains? Find a way to break them? There was a pause. You're serious about this? Completely serious. Another pause. Longer this time. Then He-Jin said, all right. Transmit detailed scans of the chain structure. I'll see what I can figure out. 7 Binchenton 90s Life 4. Life tutors, weaken 7 plies. But Daeho, if we do this and fail, we'll start an interstellar incident. The Velthics won't forgive us for interfering with their property. She's not property, Daeho said firmly. She's a person. And I won't leave her here. Through the connection, he felt Henri's surprise and gratitude. In all her long imprisonment, no one had ever called her a person. To the Velthics, she was a resource, a thing to be used and discarded. But to this human, this small brave creature called Daeho, she was someone worth saving. The tiny spark of hope in Henri's heart grew a little brighter. Number chained beneath an alien lake, the dragon sobbed, until a human diver pulled her out. He-Jin worked faster than she had ever worked in her life. The scans Daeho sent up showed a chain system that was both brilliant and horrifying. The chains weren't just metal. They were a complex technological system that used quantum locks to bind themselves to Henri's biological energy. Every time Henri's heart beat, the chains drew a tiny amount of her life force. That energy traveled through the links to generators on the surface, where it was converted into power for Velthic installations. The system had been running for thousands of years, maybe longer. It was elegant and efficient and absolutely evil. Breaking the chains conventionally would trigger a feedback loop that would kill Henri instantly. The quantum locks would detect the break and release all the stored energy back into her body at once. It would be like getting struck by lightning from the inside. But He-Jin was not a conventional engineer. She sat in the research station, surrounded by holographic displays, running simulation after simulation. Her team members watched nervously as she worked. They all knew what was at stake. Corporal Bo-Ra, the team's medic, brought Hee-Jin a cup of coffee. "Can it be done?" she asked quietly. Hee-Jin rubbed her eyes. She had been awake for 20 hours straight. "Maybe. If we can overload the system from the outside while simultaneously cutting the energy drain, the quantum locks might release. It's like picking a lock while someone is shooting at you. The timing has to be perfect. What do you need?" "Our ship's reactor core. The portable fusion cells. Every power source we have." Hee-Jin looked up at Bo-Ra. "And even then, it might not be enough. Plus, if we strip the ship, we won't have enough power to leave orbit." Bo-Ra smiled grimly. "I don't think any of us are planning to run away." The team began dismantling their equipment. Ensign Taeyang, their pilot, worked on extracting the reactor core, while trying not to think about what that meant for their ship. Without the core, they would be stranded here. No way to escape if things went wrong. Meanwhile, on the surface of the moon, the Velthic ship landed. Admiral Torvex emerged, flanked by armed soldiers. He was tall and angular, with gray skin and eyes that glowed faintly blue. His species had evolved from aquatic predators, and he still had the cold, calculating demeanor of a hunter. Torvex walked to the edge of the lake and looked down at the red water. He had been to this moon 3 times before, checking on the prisoner. Each time, he had found her a little weaker, a little closer to death. He had estimated she had maybe another century left. Then they could harvest her body for the museums and finally close this chapter of history. But now these humans were interfering. Torvex didn't understand it. What did they care about an ancient creature that had been here since before their civilization existed? The Ryuvari were relics of a bygone age. The galaxy had moved on. He activated his communicator. "Human vessel. This is Admiral Torvex of the Velthic Imperial Navy. You are in violation of Velthic sovereign territory. Cease your operations immediately and prepare to be boarded." Back at the research station, Hee-Jin received the message. She looked at her team. They all nodded. She opened a channel. "Admiral Torvex. This is Lieutenant Hee-Jin of the Terran Exploration Corps. We are conducting a scientific survey in international space. This moon is not registered as Velthic territory." "That is incorrect. We have historical claim to this system dating back thousands of years." "Historical claim based on what?" "The fact that you imprisoned someone here?" There was a long silence. Then Torvex's voice came back, colder. "I don't know what you think you found down there, but it is Velthic property. Interfering with it is an act of war." Hee-Jin took a deep breath. "We know what you did. We know about the Ryuvari. We know you betrayed them and chained them across the galaxy. We have proof." Another silence. When Torvex spoke again, his voice was dangerous. "Then you know that this matter is far above your authority. You are making a mistake that your government will pay for." "Maybe," Hee-Jin said. "But we're making it anyway." She cut the channel and turned to her team. "All right. We have maybe an hour before they decide to stop talking and start shooting. Let's get this equipment to Daeho." Down in the depths, Daeho received the supply drop. Hee-Jin had rigged everything into a weighted sled that sank down to his position. The reactor core, the fusion cells, and a complex array of cables and connectors. There were also instructions, laid out step by step. Daeho read through them twice, trying to memorize everything. The plan was insane. They would have to connect the power sources directly to the chains, creating a massive overload. At the exact same moment, they would sever the connection between the chains and Henri's body. The timing window was less than a second. Too early, and the chains would kill her. Too late, and the energy would burn her alive. Through the psychic connection, Henri watched Daeho work. She tried to tell him to stop, to save himself, but he ignored her protests. He had a stubborn streak that reminded her of the old Ryuvari, the ones who would fly into the heart of a star to save a single life. Hyjin descended to join him, her own diving suit carrying additional tools. Together, they began the installation. It was delicate work. The chains were still active, still draining Henri's energy. One wrong move could trigger a cascade failure. As they worked, Henri felt something she hadn't felt in millennia. Fear. Not for herself, but for these humans who were risking everything for her. She had lost so much over the centuries. She didn't want to lose them too. On the surface, Admiral Torvex's patience ran out. He had been monitoring the humans' communications, listening to their desperate plan. It was foolish and would never work, but he couldn't take the chance. If they somehow succeeded, if the prisoner escaped, it would raise questions about all the other Ryuvari installations across the Empire. "Prepare the orbital cannons," he ordered. "We'll boil that lake and everything in it." His weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, there are humans down there. That's their choice." They were warned. Target the center of the lake. Fire when ready. The Velthic ship powered up its weapons. Massive energy cannons extended from the hull, targeting the water below. In the research station, Taeyang saw the weapons activating. He knew exactly what they meant. "Hey Jin, the Velthics are powering weapons. They're going to fire on the lake." Through the underwater communication system, Heijin heard the warning. She and Daeho were almost finished with the installation. 5 more minutes, and they would be ready. But they didn't have 5 minutes. "Taeyang," Heijin said calmly. "Remember when I said we might need a distraction?" The pilot nodded, though no one could see him. "I remember." Quote, "I remember. Now would be a good time." Taeyang looked at Bo-Ra, who had joined him in the research station. She nodded. They both knew what had to be done. "It's been an honor serving with you," Taeyang said. "Same," Bo-Ra replied. Taeyang climbed into their ship. The small research vessel that was now little more than a hollow shell without its reactor. But it still had thrusters. It could still fly. And most importantly, it could still ram. He fired the engines and launched toward the Velthic cruiser. Admiral Torvex watched the human ship approach. Was the pilot insane? Did he think he could damage a Velthic warship with that tiny vessel? "Ignore it," he ordered. "Maintain firing sequence." But Taeyang wasn't aiming for the hull. He was aiming for the weapons array, the extended cannons that were charging to fire. He knew from his training that weapons systems were always the most vulnerable part of any ship. They had to be exposed to function. The research ship slammed into the Velthic weapons array at full speed. The impact crumpled the human vessel like paper, but it also tore through the delicate mechanisms of the energy cannons. Explosions rippled across the Velthic ship's hull as power systems overloaded. Taeyang died instantly, but his sacrifice bought the time they needed. In the depths, Heijin finished the last connection. "Ready," she said. Daeho looked at Henri. Through their connection, he sent her one final message. "Hold on. This is going to hurt." Then, he activated the system. Energy poured into the chains from the human power sources. The quantum locks began to vibrate, confused by the massive influx. The chains started to glow, brighter and brighter. Henri screamed as thousands of years of accumulated energy suddenly reversed direction, flooding back into her body. Daeho held onto her, refusing to let go even as the energy discharge began to electrocute him through the water. He gritted his teeth against the pain and held on. That's when Bo-Ra dove into the water. Number chained beneath an alien lake. The dragon sobbed, until a human diver pulled her out. Bo-Ra had watched the energy readings spike from the research station. She saw Daeho's vital signs going critical. She knew what was happening down there. The energy feedback was killing him, and he was too stubborn to let go. So she made a choice. The same choice that Taeyang had made moments before. The choice that humans throughout history had made when someone they cared about was in danger. She grabbed a spare diving suit and descended as fast as she could. The red water rushed past her as she dropped into the depths. Her suit wasn't designed for rapid descent, and warning alarms screamed at her. She ignored them all. Below, she could see the glow. The chains were lit up like lightning, and at the center of it all was Dae-ho, holding on to Henri, while electricity coursed through his body. His suit was starting to fail, the insulation breaking down under the assault. Bo-Ra kicked harder, pushing her suit beyond its limits. She reached the bottom and swam straight toward Dae-ho. Through his helmet, she could see his face twisted in pain. He was losing consciousness, but his hands were still locked onto Henri's scales. "I'm sorry," Bo-Ra whispered. Then she grabbed Dae-ho and pulled with all her strength. For a moment, he held on. Even unconscious, his determination kept his grip tight. But Bo-Ra was strong, and she leveraged her weight against the lake floor. Dae-ho's hands came free, and she pushed him away from the energy field. Then she took his place. The electricity hit her like a physical blow. Every muscle in her body locked up as the current ripped through her. Her suit's systems exploded in showers of sparks. But she had bought Hyejin the seconds she needed. Hyejin's hands flew over her controls. The timing had to be perfect. She watched the energy levels spike higher and higher. The quantum locks were destabilizing, their coherence breaking down under the massive overload. Just a few more seconds. Then, she saw Bo-Ra's vital signs flatline. Hyejin's vision blurred with tears, but her hands didn't shake. She counted down in her head. 3, 2, 1. She triggered the severing sequence. Explosive bolts fired along the chains where they connected to Henri's body. The links separated, and in that instant, the quantum locks released. The chains shattered, breaking apart in a cascade of fragments that rained down onto the lake floor. Henri screamed. The sound was so loud that it cracked Hyejin's helmet visor. Thousands of years of stored energy flooded back into her body all at once. It should have killed her. By every calculation Hyejin had made, it should have burned her from the inside out. But Henri was Ryuvari. She was designed to process vast amounts of energy. Her body, starved for so long, drank in the power like a desert drinks rain. Her scales began to glow. Her wings, folded for millennia, began to unfold. The lake floor trembled as Henri moved for the first time in ages. Her muscles screamed in protest, atrophied from disuse. But she pushed through the pain. She had to. The humans had sacrificed too much for her to give up now. Hyejin grabbed Dae-ho's unconscious body and began to swim upward. She couldn't reach Bo-Ra. The medic's body had been thrown clear by the energy blast and had sunk into the trench. Hyejin wanted to go after her, wanted to bring her home, but she had to get Dae-ho to safety first. Above them, Henri rose. The lake water boiled around her as her body temperature spiked. She was weak, so weak that just moving took all her concentration. But she was free. The chains that had bound her for countless centuries were gone. On the surface, Admiral Torvex stared at his displays in disbelief. The energy signature from the lake was spiking off the charts. The prisoner was moving. After all this time, after all their precautions, the humans had actually done it. "All weapons, fire into the lake," he shouted. "Kill it before it reaches the surface." But his weapons array was damaged. Only 2 of the 8 cannons were functional, and they were still cycling. The weapons officer worked frantically to bring them online. Henri broke the surface. Water cascaded off her massive body as she emerged into the air for the first time since her imprisonment. The moon's thin atmosphere was cold, but she didn't care. She spread her wings, and though they trembled with weakness, they held. She saw the Velthic ship, she saw the weapons charging, and she felt rage. Not the hot rage of youth, but the cold, ancient rage of justice denied for too long. With a cry that shook the ground, Henri launched herself into the air. Her wings beat once, twice, carrying her up despite the weakness in her muscles. She was nowhere near her full strength. In her prime, she could have destroyed that ship with a thought. Now, she could barely fly. But she didn't need to be at full strength. She just needed to be strong enough. The Velthic weapons fired. Energy beams lanced out, cutting through the air toward Henri. She twisted in flight, her millennia of experience guiding her body. The beams missed by meters. She folded her wings and dove toward the ship. Torvex's crew scrambled for battle stations. They had weapons designed to fight other ships, not a creature that could dodge and weave through the air. Their targeting systems couldn't track her movements. Henri slammed into the side of the Velthic cruiser. Her claws, each one as long as a human was tall, tore through the hull like paper. She ripped open a section near the engines and poured her own energy into the breach. The air inside ignited, and explosions rippled through the ship's interior. The cruiser listed to one side, trying to gain altitude. Torvex ordered emergency thrust, trying to escape. But Henri was faster. She flew around the ship and landed on top of it, her weight crushing external sensors and weapons. Through the hull, she could sense the Velthics inside. Dozens of them, scared and scrambling. She could kill them all. It would be easy. Just tear the ship apart and let the atmosphere rush out. But then she felt something else. A presence in her mind. Weak and fading. But there. Deho. He was barely conscious, but he was reaching out to her through their connection. She felt his emotions. Not rage. Not hatred. Just a simple plea. Don't become like them. Henri hesitated. Every part of her wanted revenge. Wanted to make the Velthics pay for what they had done. But Deho was right. If she killed them in cold blood, how was she different from those who had chained her? She roared in frustration, then tore the ship's communication array free instead of killing the crew. The Velthic cruiser went dark, unable to call for help or coordinate attacks. Then Henri grabbed it with her claws and began to drag it down toward the moon's surface. Inside the research station, Heejin had gotten Deho onto a medical table. His suit was ruined, burned through in dozens of places, but he was breathing. His heartbeat was weak, but steady. She heard a tremendous crash outside. Through the station's windows, she saw Henri landing, the Velthic ship clutched in her claws. The dragon set the ship down with surprising gentleness, then turned to look at the research station. Heejin felt a moment of fear. Henri was massive, her golden eyes glowing with power. But then, the dragon lowered her head, in what could only be a gesture of respect. Through the psychic connection she had shared with Deho, Henri could sense the other humans. She knew who they were. Heijin, who had figured out how to break the chains. Taeyang, who had sacrificed himself to buy them time. And Bo-Ra, who had died so that Deho could live. Henri had been saved by the bravery of these small creatures. They had risked everything, given everything, for someone they barely knew. It was the kind of selfless heroism she thought had died with her own people. She reached out with her mind, connecting with Heejin the way she had connected with Deho. Heejin gasped as she felt the touch. It wasn't invasive or controlling. It was gentle, respectful, an offer of communication rather than a demand. Through the connection, Henri sent a simple message. Thank you. I am in your debt. Heejin felt tears streaming down her face. She sent back her own message. Our friend is hurt. Can you help? Henri moved closer to the station. She was too large to fit inside, but she could reach through the airlock with one claw, which was surprisingly delicate. She touched Deho's chest gently. Energy flowed from her into him. Not the violent energy of the chain breaking, but the healing energy that the Ryuvari had once used to cure diseases across the galaxy. Deho's burns began to fade. His breathing strengthened. After a moment, his eyes opened. He looked up at Henri and smiled weakly. You're free, he whispered. Yes, she sent through their connection. Because of you. Because of your people. Deho tried to sit up, but Heijin pushed him back down. Take it easy. You nearly died. Bo-Ra? He asked. Heijin shook her head, unable to speak. Deho closed his eyes. They had succeeded, but the cost had been high. Number. Chained beneath an alien lake, the dragon sobbed until a human diver pulled her out. Admiral Torvex sat in his damaged ship, surrounded by sparking consoles and frightened crew members. His communication systems were destroyed. His weapons were offline. And outside, a creature that should have been dying peacefully in chains was very much alive and free. He had underestimated the humans. That was clear now. But he had also underestimated how much strength the prisoner still possessed. He thought she was nearly dead. He had been wrong. Through the cracked viewport of his ship, he could see Henri. She was looking at the human research station with what appeared to be affection. Torvex felt disgust rise in his throat. The Ryuvari had always been too soft, too willing to care about lesser species. That's why they had been so easy to betray. But then Henri turned to look at his ship. Her golden eyes met his through the viewport, and Torvex felt something he had never expected to feel. Fear. Real. Primal. Fear. She reached out with her mind, smashing through his mental defenses like they were paper. Torvex tried to resist, but she was too strong. She pulled memories from his mind, plucking them out with surgical precision. She saw the other installations, the other imprisoned Ryuvari scattered across the galaxy. She saw the reports Torvex had filed over the years, documenting how much energy each prisoner generated. She saw the calculations of when each one would finally die. She saw everything. And she saw that Torvex knew. He knew about the betrayal. He knew about the crimes. He knew, and he had never questioned it. To him, the Ryuvari were just resources to be exploited. Henri withdrew from his mind and roared. The sound was so loud that it shook the damaged Velthic ship. Torvex covered his ears. But he couldn't block out the rage in that sound. Inside the research station, Deho heard the roar and felt Henri's fury through their connection. He struggled to sit up despite Heijin's protests. "She's going to kill them," he said. "After what they did, can you blame her?" Heijin asked. Deho looked at her. "No. But if she kills them, she'll regret it. Later. And we didn't save her just so she could become a killer." He reached out through the connection, sending calm thoughts toward Henri. She felt his touch and paused. Through their link, he sent her images. Not of violence, but of justice. Not of revenge, but of truth. Henri understood. She looked at the Velthic ship and made a decision. She wouldn't kill Torvex and his crew, but she would make sure everyone knew what they had done. She reached into the ship with her mind and pulled out all of Torvex's memories related to the Ryuvari. Then she accessed the ship's data banks, copying every file, every report, every piece of evidence. When she was done, she had a complete record of the Velthic Empire's crimes. Then she broadcast it all. She didn't have access to conventional communication systems, but the Ryuvari had never needed them. She reached out with her mind across the vast distances of space, touching every ship, every station, every planet within a dozen light-years. Millions of beings suddenly received the same vision. They saw Henri's memories of her imprisonment. They saw the betrayal of the Velthics. They saw the locations of 17 other imprisoned Ryuvari. They saw the energy calculations, the cold documentation of suffering converted into power. The galaxy recoiled in horror. On the Velthic homeworld, the ruling council watched as their empire began to fracture. Species that had been part of their alliance started to withdraw. Trade partners severed connections. The younger members of Velthic society, those who had never known about the Ryuvari, protested in the streets. On dozens of worlds, military commanders received new orders. Find the nearest Ryuvari installation. Free the prisoner. And some did, racing to save the ancient dragons before they died. But some installations had already gone dark. Some Ryuvari had waited too long. Henri felt them die, their life forces winking out one by one. Each death was like losing a piece of her soul. She mourned for them, but she also celebrated. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Across the galaxy, Her people were being freed, and they were all crying out with joy and rage and relief. Daeho felt it all through the connection. He felt Henri's grief for the dead and her joy for the living. He felt the weight of millennia lifting from her shoulders, and he felt her gratitude toward him and his team. Over the next few weeks, the galaxy changed. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions. The Velthic Empire was censured and forced to pay reparations. Their voting rights in the council were suspended. Several high-ranking officials, including Admiral Torvex, were arrested to face trial. 17 Ryuvari were freed. Some were strong like Henri, able to survive once released. Others were weak and needed months of care to recover. But they were alive, and they were free. Humanity's role in the rescue became known across the galaxy. The species that had been dismissed as newcomers, young and naive, had done what no one else dared to do. They had challenged an empire and freed the oppressed. Ambassadors from 100 worlds came to meet Daeho and Hye-jin. They wanted to thank the humans who had started it all. But Daeho insisted on something first. He led them to a memorial he had built near the lake. 2 stones stood side by side, carved with names: Ensign Taeyang and Corporal Bo-Ra. They had given their lives so that Henri could be free. Henri herself attended the memorial service. She stood behind the gathered crowd, her massive form casting a long shadow. When it was her turn to speak, she used her psychic voice so everyone could understand. "I lived in darkness for thousands of years," she said. "I forgot what it meant to have hope. I forgot what it meant to be treated as a person rather than a thing. Then these humans came. They didn't know me. They didn't owe me anything. But they saw my suffering, and they couldn't walk away." She lowered her great head toward the memorial stones. "Taeyang gave his life to buy us time. Bo-Ra gave her life so that Daeho could live. They are heroes in every sense of the word, and I will make sure the galaxy never forgets them." She touched each stone gently with her claw. Energy flowed from her into the rock, transforming it. The stones began to glow with a soft golden light that would never fade. It was a Ryuvari memorial, the kind they had once built for their greatest heroes. "You will be remembered," Henri promised. "For as long as I live, and as long as any Ryuvari lives, you will be honored." In the months that followed, the freed Ryuvari formed a council. They didn't want to rebuild their old empire. That time had passed. But they wanted to help, to guide, to protect where they could, and they wanted to honor the species that had saved them. Humanity was given a special place in the council. Daeho, despite his protests, was named an honorary Ryuvari. Henri explained that in ancient times, her people had occasionally adopted worthy individuals from other species. Daeho was the first in millions of years to receive that honor. The psychic bond between Daeho and Henri never faded. She could call to him across any distance, and he could feel her presence in the back of his mind. It was comforting. Like knowing a friend was always nearby. One day, 6 months after the rescue, Henri came to Earth. It was the first time she had visited humanity's homeworld. She landed in a field outside the city where Daeho had grown up, drawing crowds of amazed onlookers. Daeho met her there, along with Hye-jin and the families of Taeyang and Bo-Ra. Henri had gifts for the families, crystals containing the memories of their loved ones' bravery, preserved forever in Ryuvari technology. Then she and Daeho walked together to a cliff overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Henri sat down carefully, trying not to damage the landscape with her massive weight. "Your world is beautiful," she said through their connection. "Thank you," Daeho replied aloud. He had gotten used to speaking out loud, even when they communicated mentally. It felt more natural. "I have a question," Henri said. "Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything for me?" Daeho was quiet for a moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. Because you were suffering, and I could help. Because that's what humans do. We see someone in pain, and we can't just walk away. We're stubborn like that. Henri made a sound that might have been a laugh. Stubborn. Yes, that is a good word for your species. Is that a compliment? It is the highest compliment I can give. Stubbornness, in the face of injustice, is what heroes are made of. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset. Then, Henri spoke again. In all my long life, across all the species I have known, I have never met anyone quite like humans. You are young and reckless and impossibly brave. You make terrible decisions and somehow make them work. You care too much and love too freely. Deho smiled. We're honored too, even if you do take up a lot of space. Henri laughed, a sound like thunder mixed with music. It echoed across the landscape, causing birds to take flight and people in the nearby city to look up in wonder. As the sun set completely and stars began to appear in the sky, Deho leaned against Henri's warm scales. Through their bond, he could feel her contentment. The ancient dragon who had sobbed alone in the darkness was at peace, and across the galaxy, other freed Ryuvari looked up at the same stars and felt the same peace. They were alive. They were free. And they had learned that even in the darkest depths, even after millennia of suffering, hope could still find a way. All because one stubborn human couldn't walk away from someone in pain. The end.